When the guns fell silent in May of 1945, Europe didn't become quiet. It became haunted. Airfields from Norway to Austria were strewn with the abandoned remains of a defeated empire. Thousands of aircraft, fighters, bombers, transports, and secret prototypes sat untouched, like ghosts waiting for a final command that would never come. What followed was not peace, but a new kind of war. A silent race between the Allies to seize the future of aviation before anyone else could. This is the story of how the Luftwaffe died, and how its machines were captured, studied, scattered, or destroyed. A story of espionage, engineering, and a technological legacy that shaped the jet age. In the first days of May 1945, the Luftwaffe wasn't defeated in the air, it simply collapsed. Fuel was gone, infrastructure shattered, commanders disappeared. By the time Germany formally surrendered, thousands of aircraft were already stranded where they last landed. Fighters sat half cannibalized, bombers lay in rows on cracked concrete. Some airfields looked like museums, frozen in time. Others like scrapyards before the cutting torches arrived. In northern Germany, bases like Flensburg, Schleswig, and Lübeck were covered with untouched aircraft. Farther south, at Prague and Rechlin, the heart of German aviation research, hangars were filled with half-completed prototypes and experimental jets that had never taken flight. The Luftwaffe, once feared across Europe, now existed only as debris scattered across a continent. The moment Germany surrendered, a new mission began, not fought with bullets, but with notebooks, cameras, and engineers. Every Allied nation wanted the same thing: German aviation secrets. America moved first. Operation Lusty, Colonel Harold Watson led a team known simply as Watson's Wizards. Their task: find cutting-edge aircraft, disassemble them, and ship them to the United States before anyone else could. They hunted jet aircraft like the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, the Arado 234 jet bomber, and rocket-powered interceptors whose speed shocked American test pilots. Some aircraft were flown out by American crews under extreme risk. Others were taken apart piece by piece and packed onto cargo ships bound for Ohio. Britain's Operation Surgeon. The British were after something different: the minds behind the machines. Engineers, test pilots, aerodynamicists, anyone who had worked on Germany's secret programs was a target for interrogation or recruitment. RAF teams combed through hangars, workshops, and laboratories, gathering documents, blueprints, and personnel who could help rebuild Britain's post-war aviation. The Soviet trophy brigades. Meanwhile, Soviet units swept through the east like a technological tidal wave. Factories, assembly lines, tools, engines, engineers. Everything deemed useful was loaded onto trains and shipped to Moscow. It was the beginning of a new competition, not for territory, for knowledge. On paper, the Allies were unified. In reality, the hunt for aircraft created friction everywhere their armies met. Soviet units arrived at certain airfields only hours after American teams had already begun loading captured jets. British investigators clashed with U.S. officers over who was entitled to particular prototypes. Some bases changed hands twice in a week, with aircraft disappearing into rail cars at night. Every nation wanted the same spoils, and every one of them suspected the others were getting ahead. The Cold War hadn't begun yet, but the temperature was already rising. By late 1945, the political wind shifted. Germany would not be allowed to rebuild a military air force, and that meant almost everything that remained would be destroyed. Airfields turned into demolition zones. Rows of fighters were bulldozed, crushed, or burned. Bombers were hacked apart by workers using axes and saws. Jets, once the pride of German engineering, were torn down for scrap metal to fuel Europe's recovery. Some aircraft were loaded onto barges and dumped into the North Sea. Others were simply blown up where they sat. Between 1945 and 1948, a wartime air fleet that once numbered in the tens of thousands was reduced to almost nothing. It was not preservation. It was eradication. And yet, a handful escaped destruction. Czechoslovakia. Factories still had engines, parts, and half-finished airframes. They rebuilt German fighters under new names, forming the backbone of their post-war air force. Their version of the Bf-109, designated S-199, would later fight in the birth of Israel. Spain. Under earlier licensing deals, Spain continued producing German-designed fighters long after the war. These aircraft would eventually appear not in battle, but in films like the Battle of Britain, France, and Norway. Both nations operated captured trainers and transports during their early Reconstruction years. These machines were not symbols of loyalty to Germany. They were simply all that was available in a devastated continent. By the late 1940s, almost every original Luftwaffe aircraft was gone. What remains today comes from crash sites, lakes, or wrecks buried for decades. Restorers often had to combine parts from multiple planes just to create one display model. And yet, the influence of these vanished machines is enormous. U.S. jet research accelerated dramatically after examining the Me-262. The Soviets built early jets inspired partly by German engineering. British designers adopted aerodynamic lessons taken from the Arado and Heinkel programs. The Luftwaffe disappeared, but its technology lived on, shaping the Cold War skies over the next 40 years. The abandoned aircraft of 1945 are long gone. Their metal was melted down, their engines silenced. their runways reclaimed by grass and time. But their legacy remains in every jet engine, every swept wing, every supersonic aircraft that followed. A forgotten fleet that once rose to dominate Europe now lives on only in fragments, in museums, and in the memories of those who witnessed the moment the skies changed forever. If you enjoyed this documentary, continue with our next story, the fate of Germany's U-boat fleet after the war. Another ghost fleet with a history of its own.